The scene is set on the docks of Georgetown, South Carolina, on the final day of 1812. A 29-year-old woman, frail from chronic illness and shattered by a grief so profound it had hollowed out her world, boards a small, swift schooner named the Patriot. This is Theodosia Burr Alston, daughter of the nation's disgraced third Vice President Aaron Burr and the then current First Lady of South Carolina. She's embarking on a desperate journey, a gamble against immense odds, through the blockaded waters of the Atlantic coast. Her destination is New York City, and her purpose is to see the one person who had always been the center of her universe: her father. This voyage was a perilous undertaking from its inception. The conflict with the British was raging, and ships patrolled the coast, forming a formidable wooden blockade. Her husband, South Carolina's Governor Joseph Alston, was bound by his duties and couldn't travel with her. The route itself would take her directly past Cape Hatteras, a notoriously dangerous stretch of coast already known as the Graveyard of the Atlantic. On top of these external threats, Theodosia's own health was fragile, worn down by years of sickness and the recent devastating loss of her only child. Yet she insisted. The need to reunite with her father after a 5-year separation overrode all caution. The Patriot would sail out of Georgetown Harbor, catch the winter wind, and vanish from the pages of history. To understand the depth of the tragedy, one must first understand the woman at its center. Theodosia wasn't merely a historical footnote. She was a remarkable figure, a product of a revolutionary era and the singular, intense focus of a brilliant and controversial father. Theodosia's upbringing was an experiment in Enlightenment ideals. While other girls of her station were taught the genteel arts, Theodosia studied a rigorous curriculum of Latin, Greek, mathematics, and philosophy. Her mother, Theodosia Prevost, was herself an intellectual and patriot who hosted American officers at her home during the Revolution. When her mother perished in 1794, Theodosia was only 11, and the already intense bond with her father deepened. At just 14, she stepped into the role of hostess at Richmond Hill, Burr's stately New York estate. She presided over dinners with the nation's most powerful and influential men, including figures like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, astonishing them with her intellect and grace. She was, by many accounts, one of the best educated women in the young American Republic. In 1801, at the age of 18, Theodosia married Joseph Alston, a wealthy and politically ambitious planter from South Carolina. Their union was complex, and while their letters suggest a genuine affection, the marriage was also a strategic alliance for the perpetually cash-strapped Aaron Burr. In short, he saw the value in a connection to the nation's wealthy and aristocratic Southern gentry. Unfortunately, the move to South Carolina's humid, swampy climate proved detrimental to Theodosia's health. The birth of her only son, Aaron Burr Alston, was a difficult one in 1802, and left her with chronic, lifelong medical problems that would plague her for the rest of her short life. Theodosia's life was inextricably tied to the dramatic arc of her father's political career. She stood by him with unwavering loyalty through his darkest moments, including the infamous 1804 duel with Alexander Hamilton and his subsequent trial. She was his staunchest defender during his sensational 1807 trial for treason, where Burr was accused of plotting to create his own empire in the American West. After his acquittal, he fled to a self-imposed exile in Europe, and for years, Theodosia worked tirelessly to secure his return. The final devastating blow to her already fragile state came in June 1812, when her son perished due to malaria. The loss of her son, combined with her chronic illness, sent her into a deep depression and physical collapse. This personal apocalypse set the stage for her final act. When Aaron Burr finally returned to New York that same year, the reunion was no longer a desire, but a desperate existential need. The schooner chosen for the voyage, the Patriot, was no ordinary passenger vessel. It was a famously fast ship, originally built as a pilot boat, a class of vessel prized for its speed and agility. In 1812, it had been commissioned by the U.S. government as a privateer, a privately owned ship authorized to attack enemy vessels. For months, the Patriot had been preying on British shipping in the West Indies, and its hold was likely filled with a valuable cargo of plunder from these raids. For Theodosia's journey, the ship was deliberately disguised to avoid enemy attention. Its weapons were dismounted and stowed below deck, and its name was painted over. It was a wolf in sheep's clothing, its aggressive past hidden beneath a veneer of civilian transport. This disguise, intended as a safety measure, would have a profound consequence. Any wreckage that might have washed ashore would have been nearly impossible to identify, preventing a conclusive discovery and leaving the door wide open for speculation. Aware of the immense risks, Theodosia's family took what precautions they could. Governor Alston, leveraging his official position, provided the ship's captain with a formal letter, addressed to the commander of the British fleet. The letter explained his wife's situation and requested, as a matter of gentlemanly gallantry, safe passage through the blockade, should they be caught. If the British did capture the ship, this letter was supposed to ensure that they were free to loot the cargo in return for safe passage for the ship. On the other end, from New York, Aaron Burr arranged for a trusted friend, Dr. Timothy Green, to travel south and accompany his daughter on the voyage. Theodosia was also attended by her personal maid, whom she had a friendly relationship with. The Patriot set sail from Georgetown on New Year's Eve, 1812. The journey to New York, under normal conditions with a fast ship like the Patriot, was expected to take about 5 or 6 days. For 2 days, the voyage seems to have been uneventful. On January 2nd, 1813, the last known, verifiable contact with the ship occurred. As it sailed off the treacherous coast of Cape Hatteras, the Patriot was intercepted by a British warship. Governor Alston's letter worked precisely as intended, and after reviewing the document, the British commander waved the small schooner on its way. This moment marks the critical turning point, the last instant the Patriot and its passengers were ever confirmed to be seen alive. Later that very night, a violent winter gale swept through the area. The storm was so severe that it scattered the powerful, well-armed ships of the British fleet. The small, swift Patriot, having just been waved through the blockade, would have sailed directly into the clutches of the storm. After that night, no trace of the ship, its cargo, its crew, or its distinguished passenger was ever found. In the weeks and months that followed, as hope turned to despair, two competing narratives emerged to explain the silence from the sea. One was grounded in the grim probability of maritime disaster, and the other in the lurid and sensational world of piracy. The most logical and widely accepted explanation for the Patriot's disappearance is that it was simply overwhelmed by the forces of nature. This theory is supported by the strongest circumstantial evidence available. The confirmed last sighting of the ship off Cape Hatteras was followed immediately by a documented severe gale, powerful enough to disperse a naval fleet. The waters off North Carolina's Outer Banks were already infamous for their shifting shoals and violent weather. This was the conclusion reached by the two men who knew Theodosia best, her husband and her father. Both Joseph Alston and Aaron Burr, after frantic initial searches, came to believe she was lost at sea. Burr, a man of intense pragmatism, consistently dismissed the more sensational rumors of piracy. He stated with grim certainty that if his daughter were still alive, there was nothing in the world that could keep the two of them apart. Despite the logical explanation of the storm, a darker and more dramatic narrative quickly took hold. This theory claims that the Patriot, laden with privateering treasure, fell victim to foul play. The culprits varied in the telling. Sometimes they were pirates who captured the ship on the open sea. These land-based pirates were said to operate along the coast, luring ships onto the shoals on stormy nights with false lights. Once a vessel ran aground, the wreckers would swarm it, eliminating any survivors and plundering the cargo. For over half a century, the mystery of Theodosia's fate remained a tragic family story and a piece of maritime lore, with the storm theory as the most logical explanation. Then, in 1869, a strange discovery on the Outer Banks of North Carolina reignited the mystery and gave it a tangible, haunting focus that has kept it alive ever since. The story begins when a physician from Elizabeth City, Dr. William Poole, was called to treat an ailing, impoverished elderly woman. She resided in the remote community of Nag's Head. Having no money to pay for his services, she offered him her only valuable possession, a beautiful, professional oil portrait of a young woman. The painting's origin story was pure folklore. The most common version held that the woman's first husband had taken the portrait from a deserted ship that washed ashore around 1813. Dr. Poole, who was familiar with the legend of Theodosia's disappearance, became convinced that the elegant woman in the painting was her. He theorized that she had been carrying it as a gift for her father, a final memento of the daughter he hadn't seen in 5 years. When photographs of the portrait were shown to descendants of the Burr family, they agreed that the resemblance was striking. However, it was showed to others who knew her in life, and they found that it didn't look anything like her at all. The painting, now known as the Nag's Head portrait, eventually found a home in Yale University's Lewis Walpole Library, where it remains a key artifact in this unsolved mystery. Whether this painting actually depicts Theodosia remains unclear, but personally, I think the resemblance is uncanny. If you're one of those people who just listens, I've put a confirmed portrait of Theodosia on the left, with the Nag's Head portrait on the right. Let me know if you think this depicts the same person or not. As for what happened to Theodosia herself, I tend to think the simplest explanation is also the correct one here. All evidence points to the ship simply being caught in a storm and being destroyed. Since the ship was deliberately not showing any identification, so as to run through the British blockade, this would have complicated any identification efforts later on. Notably, pirates operating along the Carolina coast in 1813 typically sought ransom when possible, and Theodosia was the daughter of Aaron Burr and the wife of a governor. It would have been immediately and readily apparent just by her clothing and manner of speech that at the very least she was a woman of wealth and means. Had she fallen into their hands, her survival would have been immensely more profitable than eliminating her. The absence of any efforts to exploit her social and political connections undermines the idea that pirates were responsible. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy, just reminding you to like and subscribe, and also to share this video. Also, don't forget to check out the video podcast, Lazy Chill History, by clicking the link in the description. On a chilly March night in 1923, a Buick coupe sat abandoned on a downtown St. Louis street corner. Its engine was cold and its driver missing. Police towed it with little fanfare, until they learned the car belonged to a Catholic priest from Illinois who had vanished. The disappearance of Father John Raniak soon gripped the region, and became one of the era's most haunting unsolved mysteries. John Raniak was not the kind of man anyone expected to vanish. At 28, he was a beloved priest in the small town of Virden, Illinois. Born in 1895 to Slovak immigrants, John grew up in a devout family and felt an early calling to the church. He was ordained in 1917 and assigned to Virden's Sacred Heart Catholic Church, where he quickly became a pillar of the community. He was cheerful, energetic, and devoted to his parishioners. He lived with his mother and siblings and spent his days ministering to families and organizing community events. By 1923, Father John seemed happy and settled, and nothing in his life hinted at the possibility that he would simply disappear. Monday, March 5th, 1923, began as a routine day for Father Raniak. He set out on the 85-mile drive from Virden to St. Louis to purchase supplies for a church bazaar. He often combined such errands with visits to friends, and that day he hoped to see Father Vincent Linek, a close pal serving at a St. Louis parish. John left Virden in the morning driving his gray Buick. He arrived in St. Louis before noon and stopped at Father Linek's home, but his friend wasn't there. John left a note and proceeded downtown to do his shopping. Witnesses later recalled seeing the young priest calmly buying goods in the afternoon, around 2:30 p.m. Once he'd completed his errands, he headed back toward Illinois, planning to be home that night as promised. We know Father John made it part way. In Venice, Illinois, just across the river from St. Louis, a mechanic reported that John stopped at his garage for a quick car repair early that evening. The priest continued on his way after the fix, but that brief encounter in Venice was the last time anyone saw Father Raniak. When Father John did not return home on Monday night, worry began to spread in Virden. It was unlike him to be out of contact, and by Tuesday morning, his family and parishioners were anxious. Phone calls to friends and neighboring parishes turned up no sign of him. On Wednesday, March 7th, a group of concerned Virden residents traveled to St. Louis to report the priest missing and help search. Only then did a crucial clue emerge, and the police realized that they had already found Father John's car before anyone knew he was missing. Inside the vehicle, investigators found disturbing signs. Papers belonging to the priest were scattered on the front seat, as if someone had rifled through them or there had been a struggle. One was a bill for a film ironically titled The Victim. More chilling was what someone had left in the back seat area of the vehicle. Scratched into the paint were the words, "We won." These two words, gouged in 6-inch letters, felt like a cruel taunt from whoever had taken Father John. Police also noticed mud and bits of cornstalk clinging to the undercarriage, suggesting the car had been driven off-road into farm fields. And tellingly, the St. Christopher medal that John kept in his car, a patron saint charm for safe travel, was missing, its clasp pried empty. It seemed clear that somewhere after leaving St. Louis, the priest had met with foul play. The mystery of the missing priest captured headlines, and law enforcement from Missouri and Illinois mobilized. Search parties scoured the roadsides and woods along Father John's route. Volunteers dragged the river shallows and checked every ditch, well, and ravine where a body might be. But aside from the ominous clues in the car, nothing was found. Father John had vanished without a trace. With publicity came a flood of tips and a fair share of false leads. In early April, a St. Louis newspaper published a sensational claim that Father Raniak had been living a double life as an armed robber. Unsurprisingly, no evidence ever turned up to indicate that this mild-mannered priest had turned to banditry. Another tip, a telegram demanding a ransom and claiming the priest would be returned safely, also turned out to be a hoax. In the absence of answers, theories swirled. One idea was that Father John might have disappeared by choice, abandoning his clerical life. Those who knew him vehemently rejected this, and he had given no indication of despair or desire to leave. Suspects were investigated, but no evidence turned up in relation to any of them. The most ominous suspect was a man named Andrew Rolando. Rolando was a fugitive who was known for what was euphemistically called at the time anti-Catholic sentiment. And by anti-Catholic sentiment, I'm underselling what he did here in a massive way. He was already wanted for slaying a priest in another state in 1921. It was easy to imagine that this dangerous man might have crossed paths with Father Raniak on that fateful evening. Yet, like all other leads, nothing definitive came of it, and Rolando was never caught or questioned in connection with the case, and there was no hard proof he was involved. That said, he was confirmed to be in the area at the time. Despite the incredible passage of time, there is faint hope that this case will one day be solved. Father Raniak's remains may have been found years ago, and he may be known in some other context as a John Doe, just waiting to have his name returned to him. Genetic genealogy may one day be able to prove this priest is one of the nation's innumerable John Does just waiting to be identified.